Anyway, but now we are joined once again by Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, who is going to attempt, at least, to help us unravel another one of Trump's Twitter messes. Of course, his Twitter messes extend way beyond Twitter. Dr. Gleb Tsipursky is a professor at Ohio State, specializing in rational thinking and decision-making in politics and other life areas. He leads the nonprofit Intentional Insights that's organizing the pro-truth movement. And he appears frequently as a guest on radio and TV to discuss dealing with political deception. And he is working on a book called The Alternative to Alternative Facts, Fighting Post-Truth Politics with Behavioral Science. Gleb, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks again, Pam, for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be back with you, and Michael as well.
Gleb, we are once again being gaslit, I like this term gaslit, by Trump and his buddies in D.C. It must have been about 3 weeks ago now that Trump started another Twitter storm. I have to be careful in the language that I use due to the FCC. His first tweet was terrible. Just found out that Obama had my, quote, wires tapped in Trump Tower just before the victory. Nothing found. This is McCarthyism. Odd. Then he says, how low has President Obama gone to tap, spelled wrong, my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon/Watergate, bad or sick guy. And this is where this whole mess actually started. I should mention that there were 145,000 hearts, thumbs up, likes on Twitter, and more than 51,000 retweets of this tweet, okay, the first one, and then even more of the second one. So this isn't a small, it's hard to talk about Twitter with seriousness, but it really is for me. I don't know why. I just think 140 characters, what can you do with that? It's all about this attention economy. Anyway, what do you make of this? What can we make of the wiretapping claims in the first place? And of course, over the last few weeks, this has just become a real mess. What do you think of this, Gleb?
Yeah, well, your first question, what can you do with Twitter? You can clearly be elected president with Twitter.
Which is pathetic. Anyway, just one person's opinion.
Right. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the data on this topic. It's not simply the numbers of people who have been retweeting this. It's a number of people who actually believe Trump's claims. So these are claims that he proposed in that Twitter cluster clock, as you said, to make sure to stay within the FCC guidelines. And right now, polls came out by Rasmussen reports, which is a reputable polling place, that about 43% of Americans do believe that the Obama administration wiretapped Trump Tower. So this is what 43% of Americans believe. This is not about, kind of how many retweets Trump's tweets have. This is polls showing the pure data on what people believe. And to people who are like us, who care about truth and reason and logic,
Gleb,
it might seem ludicrous.
Gleb,
yes.
Can I just clarify that? Do 43% of people believe that Trump Tower was wiretapped during the 2016 election, or just that Trump Tower was wiretapped?
They believe, the question was phrased in this way: do you believe that the Obama administration wiretapped Trump Tower during the 2016 election?
Okay.
So this is specifically asking about whether the Obama administration wiretapped Trump Tower, wiretapped the Trump Tower. So,
Yeah,
yes,
no,
it said during last year's presidential campaign. So, yes.
It's just very interesting because I think one of the critical points here is the way in which in 140 characters or less, it's very easy to abbreviate to the extent that there's a lot of confusion, right? Because there has been some wiretapping of Trump Tower. I think that we now know that, although it's hard for me even to distinguish between truth and alternative facts. But it does seem that there is some piece of Trump's claim that was actually correct. The timing and the person who was culpable, if culpability is even a factor here, that was the part that was clearly incorrect. Am I right there, or am I getting it mixed up?
Well, so the question let's be clear about the question. The question in the wording for the Rasmussen Report's phone poll was that did the Obama administration tap telephones in the Trump Tower during last year's presidential campaign?
Right.
And what Trump said, that's what Trump said. He blamed Obama personally for doing that. Now, if Trump said something like, my phone communications may have been accidentally collected as part of a broader surveillance of foreigners who might have been in communication with my campaign during the 2016 presidential campaign or earlier, that would not have been news. Nobody would have been bothered by that.
That's interesting.
Yes, that's obvious. That's, if there is surveillance of foreigners who might have been interfering with the election campaign, his communications might have been collected. That's not a problem. But he said something that was incredibly provocative and it is hugely problematic. He specifically blamed the Obama administration, Obama himself personally, not even the administration, for wiretapping him. And he compared it to Nixon and Watergate and McCarthyism and so on, kind of clearly making the connection that this was a deliberate political move to undermine Trump during the election campaign. So it's not simply about what is the kernel of truth. I think one of the challenges that I see in media reporting is on this topic is that media are looking for what's true about this. And what's true about this is not, the small details that might have been the case. Well, sure, it might be the case that Trump's communications were collected during incidental surveillance. But what is the bigger thing is how it impacts the political landscape and destroys the environment of truth and trust, the tragedy of the commons, what I talked about as a tragedy of the commons for us, because through these sorts of accusations by Trump.
Well, Gleb, in terms of truth as something in the commons, you raised this before on the show, and it's such an important idea. It stuck with me, I have to say, that truth itself is something that belongs in the commons. One of the things that I find fascinating, and Twitter is surely a part of this, which is the way we live in this society now that's so highly individualized, right? Mm-hmm. And so everyone can have their own platform, in a sense, on a social medium like Twitter, right? You can put out your truth constantly. Here in 144 characters, this is what I believe, this is what I think, right? And so you get this whole mess. I mean, one of the reasons that I have never been able to get into Twitter personally is it's just constant. I mean, there's so much information, and all of a sudden it really only becomes about the group that you're in and what that group believes in and what kind of a truth that group shares, right? So in a sense, this kind of a truth, 43% of Americans are simply misinformed. They have, but their truth is literally our alternative fact.
Yes, unfortunately, it's not our alternative fact. It is the truth of reality. We have to, however hard it may be to acknowledge, we need to acknowledge the truth of the reality that 43% of Americans believe this silly claims. And they believe this because of exactly what you said, Pam. Their identification with Trump, they feel connected to Trump and to his tribe, and they feel part of that tribe. So they value that tribal identification more than they value the truth. So it's not about whether what Trump says is correct.
Yeah.
It's about whether it feels good.
Yeah, I would agree with you that. I don't know about being a part of Trump's tribe, because I'm sure that Donald Trump does not share those feelings with the mass of his supporters. Yeah. But nonetheless, Gleb Tsipursky, I wanted to ask you about, now we're seeing another news item that's playing out over the past weekend and into this week. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee met secretly at the White House complex with source documents detailing the intelligence community's incidental collection of communications. Help us, in the time that we have remaining, from your vantage point, help us kind of unpack what we're looking at here. He met with Chairman Nunez met with a source at the White House grounds, and he wasn't invited. Help us unpack and understand this.
Sure. So Nunez, as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, has privileged access to intelligence that other Congress people do not have due to his position. So he was able to get access to some intelligence documentation, and then he made the claim that Trump's communication was collected as part of incidental surveillance. Now, that was the big claim that got a lot of press coverage. We now know that he backed away from that claim. He is now saying he's not sure whether Trump's whether Trump's information was communicated, but his backing away is much less newsworthy than his original claim. So this is kind of how these fake news claims get perpetuated. People say, this is a thing, and they make a very large, big statement, very expansive. And then when there's pushback, they can go back and say, maybe I was wrong, or maybe I didn't mean it to say it in this exaggerated way, although, of course, they did. And now they can go and say, it's not as big as I was making it out to be.
Right.
But then the newspapers are not going to carry his backtracking.
Yeah, you can't take it back.
No.
You can't take it back.
So people still have the impression, this is why 43% of Americans have the impression that Trump was wiretapped by Obama during the last presidential campaign. And this is kind of why I'm working to launch the pro-truth movement, which would help shift people's values and orientations toward recognizing the truth is a common good that we all share. And just like pollution of the environment is bad, pollution of the truth is horrible and will destroy us all in the end if we don't do something about it.
I mean, the concept of truth in and of itself is something that philosophers have debated for centuries and centuries, even just looking within Western philosophy. And if we expand out into Eastern philosophy, there's surely a different understanding of truth itself. I'm just wondering if this is a matter as much of trust, maybe, as not only truth, but who we trust. Because there's something you said, that Nunez had privileged access. And so if he's an elected representative, and it seems like we should trust him. And he's saying something that interlinks with Trump's tweets. And so I just wonder if it's possible to have something like truth anymore in this highly individualized society, and if what we're really talking about is a kind of a trust.
Great question. I think it's very important for us to recognize that truth is possible, even though it's difficult. Truth is possible in terms of the truth of reality. There is a truth to seeing whether Obama personally ordered the Trump administration's, the wiretapping of the Trump administration. There is a statement that can be verified. that we can verify whether Trump's sort of information was gathered or not. So these are things that are verifiable.
Let me just ask this, Gleb. We live under this surveillance society, and so I think that you're right that it can be verified, but do we have the access to actually verify these things? I'm sure that there are many lefty listeners right now who are saying, well, maybe Obama really did wiretap. Because we've been lied to so much by our government, and we know that we're under constant surveillance, so it seems very plausible, and we don't have access to that kind of privileged information where we would be able to distinguish between, fact versus fiction, in a sense, the kind of truth that you're speaking of.
Oh, definitely, which is why we need to look at people who have access, and no one has better access than the President of the United States. He has charge over the NSA, over the FBI, over the CIA. He can fire any of the executives of these agencies at any moment. So he can fire anyone in those agencies at any moment. He has the access. If he had the proof, he would provide it by now. So this is the question of looking at the people. So we need to follow the power. So you were talking about trust. There's a combination of trust, power, and truth. So who has the access to find out this information? People in power. People in power is Trump. If Trump is telling the truth, he would provide the evidence.
Right.
If he's not providing the evidence, then he's lying. Then, therefore, he's just making claims that have no basis in fact.
Right.
So this is the nature of how we can evaluate and untangle these things. So one of the things we need to think about is how do we evaluate and untangle the things? We need to follow the lines of power and where the people have power. And Trump has the power. Other people, Nunez has certain power, certain access. So he made this statement. Now we can see that he's backing away from it. So we know that he lied in his original statement when he said that he knew that, Trump's surveillance was collected, or Trump's information was collected. So we can have knowledge of the truth. Now the question is, how do we incentivize politicians to orient toward the truth?
Well,
and this is kind of the questions that I'm trying to answer as part of the pro-truth movement and the book that I'm writing and so on, to create incentives for politicians to care about the truth.
Well, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, this is a conversation that we are definitely going to continue. We really appreciate you coming on again, and we're looking forward to having you on again as we can continue to unravel the messes. I'm sure we'll have plenty more to unravel together. I just want to say Dr. Gleb Tsipursky is a professor at Ohio State, and you can look him up online. The name of his nonprofit is Intentional Insights, which is organizing a pro-truth movement and trying to unravel some of the mess that we find ourselves in. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr.